The Palestinian Authority has declared an end to all security agreements with Israel and the United States. This comes on the backdrop of Tel Aviv's annexation plan. Welcome to Palestine Files. I'm Wissam Bahrani. On this episode, we're going to look at what agreements the PA has exactly declared void. Will the regime's annexation trigger a third Palestinian Intifada or uprising? And what's happening on the ground following the PA's announcement? On July the 1st, Israel will begin the process of annexing large parts of the occupied West Bank, including Jerusalem, Al-Quds and the Jordan Valley. The regime says it has the backing of the United States to do so under President Donald Trump's so-called deal of the century. The Palestinians have slammed and boycotted the White House initiative, saying it liquidates their right to a state.
إن منظمة التحرير الفلسطينية ودولة فلسطين قد أصبحت اليوم في حل من جميع الاتفاقات والتفاهمات مع الحكومتين الأمريكية والإسرائيلية ومن جميع الالتزامات المترتبة على تلك التفاهمات والاتفاقات بما فيها الاتفاقات الأمنية على سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ابتداء من الآن أن تتحمل جميع المسؤوليات والالتزامات أمام المجتمع الدولي. ليش؟ كقوة احتلال في أرض دولة فلسطين المحتلة وبكل ما يترتب على ذلك من آثار وتبعات وتداعيات.
In the besieged Gaza Strip, Hamas has condemned the regime's plans for opening new doors of conflict and increasing friction. The resistance movement says the West Bank is ours, we are its people and protectors, and Jerusalem Al-Quds is our eternal capital, and we will protect it with our blood. Hamas has also announced that it has held meetings with many Palestinian resistance groups in and outside of Palestine. Much of the international community has warned Israel against pressing ahead with its plans. The UN's Middle East peace envoy has issued a stern warning against any unilateral action by Israel. Nikolai Mladenov says annexation would represent a most serious violation of international law. As Germany takes control of the European presidency, its foreign minister has traveled to the region to express serious concern.
Darauf hingewiesen, dass nach unserer Auffassung das jetzt die Zeit ist für Diplomatie und Dialog. Die Ausgangslage ist außerordentlich schwierig. Und anstatt uns jetzt schon, bevor irgendwelche Entscheidungen in Israel getroffen worden sind, uns mit wechselseitigen Drohungen zu überziehen, halte ich nicht für den richtigen Weg. Ich bin heute hier, um mit allen Seiten zu reden, das habe ich getan. Und das werde ich auch fortsetzen und mich beteiligen an der Suche nach einem Weg, an dem auch Gemeinsamkeiten gefunden werden und vor allen Dingen am Schluss eine einvernehmliche Lösung steht, so schwer das auch zu sein scheint, wenn man das von dem heutigen Tage aus beurteilen sollte.
The settlements that Israel wants to annex are already considered illegal under international law, but that hasn't stopped Tel Aviv from expanding them. This is especially the case since US President Donald Trump took office in January 2017. The regime has been building settler units with unprecedented speed. This topic has sparked a lot of reaction on social media. Here are just some of your comments, beginning with Stuart Mills, who says, "We have seen these cancellation statements before. They make a headline but don't show substantive change. More helpful to present a counter-vision that shows dignity and equality for all in the land and create a political structure that incorporates these principles." That's a very powerful statement there. Zena Hutchison says Israel is and has broken international law, international agreements, UN resolutions, and US-Israel are threatening the International Criminal Court for its investigations of human rights abuses and war crimes committed by Israel against the Palestinian people. It's true. Subhi Suleiman says, how can there ever be peace while the Israeli apartheid regime continues its occupation and atrocities against Palestinians and their children? Bibi the child killer is the choice of members of that regime. Thus it's clear they've rejected peace a long time ago. And Irish Girl says Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas declared an end to all security, cooperations and peace agreements with the US and Israel. Looks like Kushner didn't read enough books. Dave Just Dave says Kushner never had any intention of solving the Middle East problems. It was always about giveaways to Israel and SA places. He has personal and financial interests. Ariel Gold says so long overdue in regards to those security commitments with Israel that the PA have declared void. Ariel Gold there getting in touch from Code Pink. And finally, from the only true gamer who says, this seems rather vague. Is he actually doing something, or is he saying he will? Maybe we'll find out soon in this show. That was the views from the online community. Now our team has spoken to Palestinians on the streets of the occupied West Bank.
الشعب الإسرائيلي يتخذ قرارات أحادية في موضوع القضية الفلسطينية، حيث يتعامل أن الشعب الفلسطيني ليس له حقوق بوجود دولة له، ولا يتعامل أن بوجود طرف فلسطيني موجود على الأرض. فغطرس الاحتلال أصبحت في قرارات الضم، حيث أن سيادة الرئيس سعى في الفترات السابقة إلى موضوع المفاوضات مع الإسرائيليين بمقابل وقف الاستيطان ووقف الانتهاكات من قبل الاحتلال بحق الشعب الفلسطيني، ولكن غطرس اليمين المتطرف ما زالت تهتك في حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني وتنتهك حقوقنا بجميع الاتجاهات.
أساساً هي اتفاقيات أوسلو خلال 25 سنة أثبتت فشلها للشعب الفلسطيني، وتملص إسرائيل بالذات من الاتفاقيات الموقعة أدى أن الأوضاع توصل إلى ما وصلت إليه مع وقف التنسيق.
ما بعتقد أنه هذا كان وهم فلسطيني، لكن هو عبارة عن تجربة في ظل عدم وجود رديف للشعب الفلسطيني أو مساند له. أما الشعب الفلسطيني طول عمره يعني عاش في ظل وجود احتلال، وبيعرف ايش الطريقة اللي بيفكر فيها الكيان الإسرائيلي، فبالتالي ما عندوش وهم إنه الإسرائيليين مش رايحين يتنازلوا، لكن تجربة بطول تجربة لعل وعسى أنها ربنا غير الأحوال.
وليش الاحتلال غير شرعي والمستوطنات غير شرعي والضم هو نفسه غير شرعي.
الخطوة التي اتخذتها القيادة الفلسطينية بقيادة سيادة الرئيس محمود عباس أبو مازن حفظه الله وأدامه ذخرا لفلسطين، ألا وهي وقف التمسيك الأمني ووقف كافة الاتفاقيات مع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي المجرم، اللي هي خطوة إيجابية وطنية وقرار وطني عليه إجماع من كافة الفصائل الفلسطينية ومن كافة أبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني. خطوة جريئة ويجب أن تطبق على أرض الواقع، وبدأ تطبيقها من قبل القيادة الفلسطينية، وهذه الخطوة يعني يجب أن تكون دائمة ومستمرة حتى نلقن الاحتلال درسا بأن شعبنا الفلسطيني لن يتخلى عن كافة حقوقه الوطنية المشروعة.
Here's a brief idea of what the Palestinian Authority has just done. So the PA went ahead and cancelled all agreements and cooperation with Israel, including the Camp David Accord, the Madrid Conference, the Oslo Accords, the Camp David Summit of 2000, and the coordination with the CIA also. It seems that the Palestinian Authority understood that any cooperation with Israel for a so-called peaceful understanding is an illusion, because Israel has proven time and again that it can never be trusted, and frankly wants all of Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. So this story has made lots of headlines around the world. This is just some of them. Joining us for our first interview of the show is Majid Shihad, an independent Palestinian scholar. Majid, welcome. If I can ask you first, after ending all of the agreements with the US and Israel from the Palestinian side, some have suggested an armed struggle may be next. What do you think?
I think it's very hard to predict what will come. But I think in general, it's very hard to imagine an armed resistance in the West Bank for several reasons. One of them is the normalization of a certain way of life that took place, especially in the since 2000. I think after Arafat, things changed, and that's something people acknowledge on the ground. All kinds of different political organizations on the ground in the West Bank went along, or they got normalized to a different structure that was not present in the past. So I don't imagine an armed struggle. I cannot predict it, definitely.
Okay, why did Israel choose July the 1st to begin its annexation of the occupied West Bank and the entire Jordan Valley?
Internally, Netanyahu is facing a lot of issues around his corruption cases, and he might use certain dates to defer, or at least downplay the court cases that he's facing. Even though, to be honest, the court cases in Israel are actually a theater. Netanyahu will not be indicted, not today, not tomorrow. There is a pressure from different groups to try to make him, to push him towards certain policies. So I'm not sure which one of these factors are more important for him. Definitely first his own cases, to the general atmosphere in the region, the global question of the epidemic, and then the current regime in the US. If he starts in July 1st, definitely it will take a few weeks, few months, with possibilities of escalations. So he might need, and definitely he will need, a supporting US administration in the way that much more aggressive than in the past, or much more clear, not aggressive, to be honest. And then also an environment globally that is not ready to get involved in conflicts. Every country is busy with the epidemic, with all kinds of questions that they are facing inside.
Okay, Majid Shihad, an independent Palestinian scholar, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Dear viewers, stay where you are. We're going to take a short break and be right back with the rest of the show. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shataya says Tel Aviv must face the consequences of the annexation.
What we hope is that Israel does not get away with murder. What we hope is that Israel should not continue to be above international law. What we hope is that really Israel should feel the heat of international pressure. We will not allow things to go into chaos under any circumstances. And therefore, I think the international rejection of annexation and Israeli measures, the other side of the coin of this is a support for Palestine as well.
The PA has even threatened to withdraw its recognition of Israel, which happened in 1993. Meanwhile, Palestinian business owners in occupied Jerusalem and Quds are concerned they will be forced to shut down their shops. Wail al-Muhtasib runs a business selling car parts. He works in the Wadi al-Jawz neighborhood of occupied Al-Quds.
اللي صار كالتالي شيء عادي، احنا قاعدين هون محلاتنا من سنين، بتحكي عمال من 64 ابوي كان موجود هون وانا استلمت بداله وعايشين بخير جمال ومسطوره الامور ماشيه، فبنتفاجئ قبل يومين باعتين لنا اختراق اخلوا من هلا لاخر السنه. فايش مش معقول يعني يكون ممكن احنا على جرة قلم واحد يمدوا لك اخلوا، فين نخلي؟ حياتنا، مستقبلنا، شغلنا.
The annexation plan has also been met with a wave of protests in the occupied territories. This rally has been held in the center of the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah.
نحن اليوم كشعب فلسطيني نقول لا لصفقة القرن ولا للسياسة الأمريكية المعادية ولا لحكومة الاحتلال التي تحاول فرض أجندتها على الأرض. سنمضي قدما باتجاه كل تفعيل كل آلياتنا في مقاومة هذا الاحتلال أمام الاستيطان الاستعماري ومناطق التماس وكل ما له علاقة بتكريس هذا الاحتلال من أجل الوصول إلى حقوق شعبنا بالحرية والاستقلال.
طبعا هذا قرار خطير جدا، وإحنا كشعب كأبناء الشعب الفلسطيني نرفض هذا القرار جملة وتفصيلا، يعني مصرين على الاحتفاظ بكل ذرة تراب من أراضينا سواء في الأغوار أو في القرى اللي بجانب الجدار، وإحنا راح نكون سدا منيعا ضد تنفيذ هذا القرار.
Our second and final guest for this episode of Palestine Files is Randy Nord, an activist and political analyst. Ms. Nord, welcome. What can Palestinians in the occupied West Bank learn from the resistance to Israel's occupation in the besieged Gaza Strip?
Well, I think there are two things Palestinians in the West Bank can learn. First, while thousands of Palestinians died in the Second Intifada, it did result in the Israelis withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. But I believe a large part of that success, of that uprising, hinged on the fact that the Israelis had just been brutally defeated by Hezbollah in Lebanon during the July war. So the Israelis, who are already forced into conscription, weren't mentally or physically prepared to fight another war on their own soil. So I think this is why the Israelis haven't exaggerated their attacks on Lebanon lately, other than their routine surveillance drones over the capital city and nonsense along the border. They know that Hezbollah will respond, and this will put them at risk of letting their guard down for an uprising in Palestinian territories. And second, the Second Intifada was also followed by the Gaza elections just a few months later. And as we know, the Hamas party won, and immediately after that, Israel started another war, this time specifically against Gaza, and now occupies the Strip to this day. So in terms of learning from the past, even in the recent past, we know that elections and diplomacy don't work against occupation because they will always be rigged in the occupier's favor. The only thing that works is armed resistance.
Right. Why did it take so long for the Palestinian Authority to realize that any negotiations or so-called peace talks with Israel would have backfired for the Palestinians?
Well, again, Israel views the Palestinian authorities as very weak, and some things they can easily push around and mold into their favor. The Israelis know they have the upper hand in any diplomatic situation. And they know when push comes to shove, the PA will not push the envelope in the Palestinians' favor. And that's because the PA has essentially always existed to benefit Israel and not the Palestinians. But even the PA has reached its breaking point, it seems. So the relationship between the PA and Israel is quite close, but even that relationship has a limit, and I think it's been breached with these annexation plans. And now that the PA knows it has support from countries like Jordan and the UAE and a few neighbors, it realized now was finally the time to stand up and say something. But it might be too little too late. We'll have to see what that response looks like. And again, if Israel ends up following through with the annexation, they might decide that it's not worth the risk of sabotaging their own plans to normalize ties with the Gulf countries. They might still have the Saudis on board. They haven't said anything. I don't expect them to say anything on behalf of the Palestinians. But the UAE is not happy, and if they only have the Saudis on their side, they might decide that's not enough to move through with annexation. So it's really going to be a tense few weeks, I think, as we wait for July 1st to come around.
Indeed it will. Indeed it will. Randy Nord, activist and political analyst, thank you very much for your contribution to the show. Persian Gulf, let's not forget. And now, Nabil Shaath is the senior advisor to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on international affairs. In an exclusive interview with Palestine Files on the Israeli annexation, he says the PA is working on uniting the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip.
It's not a question of cancelling these agreements. We tried our best to make them work. We tried our best to make the international community put its pressure so that international will be implemented. But after the last decision by Mr. Netanyahu and his government to annex may form really the backbone of the West Bank and Gaza in a Palestinian state, we could not have really continued to commit ourselves to these agreements. The question really has to do with the balance of power. I mean, at one time there was the Soviet Union and the United States. They created some balance within Asia, doing their best to end occupation and to create independent states. Now, with the vanishing of the Soviet Union and the sole control of the world by one major power, the United States, which happened to be the strategic ally of Israel that occupies our land, made it really very difficult to implement agreements that have been signed. These agreements today, nobody is supporting and nobody is making sure that they are implemented. We are going to face it straight on. We've already declared that we are not going to implement any of our commitments in these agreements, which the Israelis have not really been committing themselves except to what they want and what they choose. But this is the first time we say we are withdrawing. We are not going, so long that Israel is going to annex the land that has been promised to the Palestinians in these agreements that we signed and the world supervised, we are not going to implement any. We already started stopping all cooperation with the Israelis on all matters, security, politics, economics, and so on. We are also doing our best to prepare ourselves for difficult times to come, including active work to reunite the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Thirdly, we are working very hard with international partners in order to face the robbery by Israel of the land, of Palestinian land in the West Bank. So far, our decision is on nonviolent resistance, and which is something like the Intifada have done several times. It all depends what the Israelis are going to do to implement their greedy action of taking over our land. I mean, but so far, I think the Palestinian decision is to resort to nonviolent action.
It does appear that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has realized so-called peace talks with Israel have brought no peace or prosperity to the Palestinians, only more aggression, land grabbing and theft of holy sites in the occupied land. As the annexation date approaches, it's now clear that the security agreements with the regime and its main sponsor, the United States, were nothing more than an illusion. Thank you for watching Palestine Files. See you next week.